All right, hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to do well on AP Lang multiple choice questions. It is a very important skill. We spend so much time talking about essay writing and constructing your own analyses of arguments and creating your own arguments and really just the composition part of AP Lang. But there is a huge part that involves being able to answer questions that have an objective right and wrong answer. And that's why the test is not just essays, because essays are subjective. And College Board does their best to have a very, appropriate score for the essays that you write, but the multiple choice questions, your performance on that, all the questions that they provide you have been, discussed and debated and fine-tuned to the point where your performance on that is there's much less, I guess, variance in your, in how you do on that. But anyway, I'm kind of already starting to get off track. The point of doing well on multiple choices and practicing it is it's worth 45% of the score, and you have 45 questions to answer. So each one of those questions are very valuable for your overall score. And you only get an hour to answer these 45 questions. So not a lot of time. And I've been told that these questions resemble SAT reading questions. And there are now new types of questions that are on the Lang multiple choice section. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the overall, the questions that you were asked on the College Board on the AP Language and Composition multiple choice test, it's assessing three skills. First, an understanding of the mechanics of rhetorical writing. So how well you understand why certain choices are being made in a given text. So they'll give you, it's like if you're familiar with in the reading portion of the SATs, they give you a short passage and then they ask you questions about it. Similar to that. I haven't looked at an SAT really since I was in high school. But I hear this from students that it's similar. They also are assessing your ability to comprehend complicated texts. And at first I put in just comprehending old texts, but even the contemporary texts they provide they are complex because they're rhetorical, because they're trying to achieve a purpose, and they're not going to just choose something that is simplistic. It's going to have a very, complicated, sometimes even Byzantine interaction of choices being made to achieve the purpose. The other skill that it's taking on is your ability to just simply answer multiple choice questions. And that's why the quicker you start preparing in the year and the more confident you feel in those, the better you'll do. If you start trying to cram at the last minute for the multiple choice part, every student's different, but I think in general, given our very busy lives, I think it helps to do it in small chunks and work your way up to the test. So practice, you have a better chance of doing well, and by extension, earning a higher overall score on the exam. I think I talked about this in my very first video about the class itself, but it's just, it's the three essays are worth 55% of your score. But you get 2.5 hours almost to write those. Whereas with multiple choice, you only get an hour. So it's very much crunch time when you do multiple choice. If you show up and you really dominate that part, there's a lot less pressure on your essays to be well in order to get a 4 or a 5 or whatever score you want. All right, so I've emphasized why it's important to practice. And I'll say this, it is so difficult. I have the World Series on, I'm sorry. I'm gonna focus. It's so difficult to try to practice these type of questions in a completely digital environment. And College Board has provided EP Classroom to give questions and things like that. But it, in my opinion, it doesn't help to just give people questions and then not give them feedback and not discuss why certain answers are the way they are. And in a normal classroom, we would do practice and we would do small, staggered, summative 15-question passages. But we're doing it differently because of, for a lot of reasons with our digital learning. But we're going to try it out. And I just care most that if you are one of my students right now, that you are meaningfully trying to get better and understand what these questions are asking you, and try to think going into these quizzes on multiple choice, what am I going to be asked? So that's what this video is trying to prepare you for. So like I said, there's two different genres of multiple choice questions: reading questions and writing questions. The reading questions ask you to assess the rhetorical choices of a given text selection, and the writing questions are new. They were supposed to be on the exam this spring, but the exam got truncated because of COVID, and it was just a single essay. But in the writing questions, it asks you to revise sentences to sharpen the rhetorical purpose, or it asks if it needs to be done. If you're familiar, well, yeah, you wouldn't be familiar with the SOL writing multiple choice questions, because if you're one of my students, you haven't taken the multiple choice test for the SOL yet. So anyway, we're just going to be focusing on the reading questions today, because for my students, that's the only thing I'm going to be assessing for them. I'm not going to throw any writing questions on it, just reading questions. And here are the three basic types of multiple choice reading questions. Questions that ask you about the rhetorical purpose. Why is the author making this choice? Or what choice is even being made? Explaining why it's being made, or what choice. Explaining what is being said. They might give a passage from a question, or from the they might select a sentence from the passage and say, what does this mean? Or in so many words, this could be summarized as, or paraphrased as, and then you have to select which one best captures the essence of that sentence, just testing your understanding. And then what is the tone? How well do you understand the subtleties of the passage? How familiar are you with fancy adjectives? From what I've observed in some of the recent multiple choice practice packets they've put out, they have reduced the amount of those type of questions. So in the quiz that I'm going to be giving to my students, I am also reducing the amount of those type of questions that I'll be asking. I'll note that AP almost never has "what is this" questions that simply says that they might identify. If, for example, they're not going to ask you, is this an example of alliteration or logos or ethos? They almost never do that anymore. I think if you go back and find multiple choice passages from maybe 20 years ago, there was some of that, but they have tried to make the multiple choice questions as functional as possible, or the questions are meant to challenge your true understanding of the mechanics of rhetoric, as opposed to Randy Rosarina just got his 9th home run, as opposed to just your ability to memorize the definitions of very arcane types of rhetorical devices and then spit that out. Okay. So I'm sorry, that might not be terribly clear, but just know that there will not be, and I ask my students to make their own sample rhetorical multiple choice questions, and a lot of them were kind of doing those type of questions like, what is this here? Is it hyperbole? Is it blah, blah? And it's like, no, they don't do those type of questions. They're more advanced than that. But the good news is the skills that are on the multiple choice questions are skills we have been working on for the past 2 months. Or if you've been watching these videos, it's taking on the skill. It's very much mirrors what we've been doing in rhetorical analysis. You will notice a prevalence of strong rhetorical verbs to describe choices when you look at the question. So that's part of the reason I've been so adamant about you using strong rhetorical verbs in your own writing, because College Board does it. And the more comfortable you are with that, the more comfortable you will be when you look at these questions. You'll find questions about exigence. That's why we've added that. That's why we talk about that with Space Cat and the rhetorical situation itself. What is the exigence of this? There will be questions about the purpose. There will be questions about the relationship between different choices made by the speaker. And I talk about that when you analyze rhetoric. If you could explain the interaction of different choices, it makes your analysis more sophisticated. And to do well on the multiple choice, having an understanding of that will serve you very well. All right, so on slide 6, I have 4 different practice passages for you. And I'm going to go over my logic behind the questioning and the answers for each of these passages. So this would be a good time to, this will probably make for a very long video, and I'm going to include timestamps. So I wouldn't expect you to go through this entire video like sequentially, but if you want to, wouldn't hurt. And if you've had me as a student, you've already done most of these except Patrick Henry, which we're going to do in class this week. So let's look at Bush 9/11. So to do this, in the spirit of this, you need to make sure you're familiar with the text we're reading. And one reason I like using George W. Bush's 9/11 speech is it's short. And all the passages you read for these multiple choice questions, the passages are never longer than like, I used to know the exact number, like 300 words or so, maybe even 400. They're at most maybe half a page single spaced, but you're expected to be able to read it pretty quickly because they're going to give you sometimes 6 questions attached to it, sometimes 9, sometimes with the new test, only 3, which is really annoying to read something long and only get a few questions. But with George W. Bush, the first question I ask about it, and this would be a good time if you haven't read the speech to go ahead and read it so we can go over these questions together. And frankly, if you've never done this before, it'd probably be best to just do the entire quiz and see how you do on it, and then start watching my explanations for why I put these answers. Okay, I ask, what is the relationship between the first 2 paragraphs in the speech? So the answer is, it builds to an emphatic point, the first paragraph, and the second paragraph elaborates on this point. This is a classic style of questioning College Board uses. What's the relationship between the first and second? What's the relationship between the second and third paragraph? And it requires not only an understanding of what's being said in it, but also an understanding of why it's being said. And notice that, and these are all questions I made, so they haven't been reviewed by any of my colleagues or by anybody who's like a super like testing authority. So, whatever. Sorry, I'm doing it in good spirit. So deal with it if you don't like it, I guess. But there's always a lot of times with these type of questions, the correct answer is one that deals with your understanding of how an argument is being made. Okay, so notice that for E, which is the correct answer, it's talking about the first paragraph building to an emphatic point. And Bush's point at the end of that first paragraph was that America is strong. And then in the second paragraph, he elaborates and gives lots of examples on how America is strong. Okay, and that works to his whole point of comforting and motivating Americans to stand strong in the wake of a unprecedented domestic attack, right? All right, next one. The speaker uses a series of metaphors in the second paragraph too. And notice this. This is also, see, when I make these questions, I just find a quiz, a released multiple choice test, and I just steal the wording and then just tailor it to fit whatever text I'm making the quiz for. So this, again, I'm just going to keep saying this is a very common type of question, but it is. Notice how they don't give you Bush's metaphor or whatever he used in the second paragraph and ask you to identify it as a metaphor. In this, they're like, all right, you know what the metaphors are because you're a smart student, because you have had 10 prior years of English class and you have plenty of knowledge about what a metaphor is, but why is he using that metaphor? And he was doing it, the best answer, the answer I wanted, was A, to celebrate the primacy of America's fortitude and values. Sometimes they will throw in words that are kind of elevated. I felt like primacy I was trying to capture the spirit of that, throwing in a word that seems kind of, fancy that might make you be like, well, is that really, I don't know what primacy is. Criticize the banality of the terrorist actions. And what's interesting is they will throw in answers that would work for different paragraphs in the passage. So you have to make sure you know when they talk about the second paragraph, you're correctly going to the second paragraph and not the third paragraph, because Bush may have used metaphors in the third paragraph to criticize the banality of the terrorist actions, but that wouldn't be the answer for this question. Okay. From the second to third paragraph, the tone shifts from eulogistic to authoritative was the correct answer. I don't have too much to say about the tone questions because I don't plan on using a lot of them with my students to practice because I'm not seeing as many of them. Like I said, I think College Board, for equity reasons, is trying to phase out questions that are just kind of testing a student's literacy or lexile level, I guess. That's why I think they're trying to phase out, or they're shifting away from as much pre-20th century texts. And the tone questions, I think, kind of fit within that genre of just more assessing your lexile level than your faculty with rhetorical choices, or your ability to identify rhetorical purposes. So we skip over that one without much explanation, although I just did digress a long time. I'm sorry. Which rhetorical strategy does the speaker adopt in the third paragraph? So look at this. He celebrates, he reassures, he threatens, he explains, he argues. Hopefully, if you were reading the passage and looking at the paragraphs, you were in your head or on a notepad as you were reading it, assigning a different paragraph or a different strong rhetorical verbs to what Bush is doing in that. And that this is where that practice comes in handy, because you should already have in your head some sort of thought of what he's actually doing, what choice he's making. And so let's see. The third paragraph is where he reassures the audience? Yeah, reassures the audience with a series of examples. And this is another one where some of the other answers would be correct for different paragraphs, but you just have to make sure you know which one is the third paragraph and just double check on that before you put your answer. Okay, and then I end with what is the purpose of the fifth paragraph. This is one that a lot of students missed when I gave this quiz, or practice rather. And the purpose is to expand the scope of the speech's audience. It doesn't offer a rebuttal to the thesis. It doesn't develop the ideas from the prior paragraph in further detail. It doesn't introduce a completely new perspective on the author's thesis, and it doesn't contrast the lifestyle of Americans and the world. That one's a good distractor, though, if I can pat myself on the back, because the fifth paragraph rather is about other people across the world giving America support. So the point was, though, it's expanding the audience, and they love to have questions that deal with who the audience is. And I don't know where I'm going with that, other than this is another one that look at the strong rhetorical verb, contrasts, introduces, offers, develops, expands. All strong rhetorical verbs. So that is George W. Bush. That's kind of, and I don't know if I'm going to do every single one of these. Am I? I'm going to go through every single one and give my explanation for them. Tell you what, I'm going to also do Patrick Henry. I'm going to go over that one. All right, before I go over Patrick Henry, one thing I should have done is go over these strategies. So I've alluded to it, but as you read the passage, try to decide what the author's purpose is overall, what they're trying to accomplish, because they'll give you a sentence of context before it starts. It'll be like, this was a speech given in 1980 at a commencement address, or you get the idea. Not a lot, though, not like the blurb of rhetorical analysis. So you got to be inferring what the purpose is, because they might ask you. They probably will ask you. Then you have to decide what the function of each paragraph is. Like I've been saying, as you read each paragraph, think, all right, are they developing their thesis? Are they providing evidence, building up to their thesis? Are they illustrating the flaws in blah, blah, blah? Are they contrasting something with something else? Just think of those strong rhetorical verbs and try to be applying them as you read it, because that will hopefully help you when you start seeing questions that deal with exactly that. If you had the passage in front of you, I would tell you to highlight or circle or note any words that are really tough to understand, meaning like big words, because I like to use passages that aren't totally easy to understand. And do your best to infer the meaning of the word or the phrase based on context clues, because they'll probably, chances are, if you don't understand it, they'll probably circle back on it and have some sort of question dealing with it. So the more prepared you are for that eventuality, the better. And then, this is really crazy, I tell my students, I started last year working, it's really frustrating because I had this very elaborate scheme, not scheme, but program, like a workout program, to get my students to do as well as possible on multiple choice. And then COVID happens and they don't have to do multiple choice on the exam. I guess I shouldn't complain because at least they got to take the exam and they did great on it. But one of my theories was that, well, I had heard from my students, I'd said, hey, what problems do you have when you take multiple choice? And they said, well, I get stressed and I just can't think well. And I started thinking like, well, how do you solve that problem? And one is by practicing. But the other thing, from a physical standpoint, something that you can control is your breathing. So when I say box breathing, here's what I mean. I don't know why they call it box breathing. Circular breathing, I think some of the musicians call it that if you do a wind instrument. But inhale for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Inhale 4, exhale 4. Inhale 4, exhale 4. And you can change the number to, as you know, you can make it 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds. Inhale for 7 seconds, exhale for 7 seconds. But if you make yourself do that, it will calm you down. That like meaningful breath, I think, is what I've heard that expression thrown around, taking meaningful breaths. But making it a point to do that in stressful moments, especially before you start one of these, can put you in a good place to succeed, because a lot of your success on multiple choice is just thinking clearly in a situation where they're intentionally trying to, in some ways, throw you off, right? Distract you. So some students thought it was crazy and didn't do it. And some students took it very seriously. And I tried to track I made them record their heart rate before they took the test. And then I put their score after it. And I was trying to get some longitudinal data to have like actual proof that it works. And I didn't get enough because we went to online learning. But I think it works. I think it's a good thing to do. And I recommend you do box breathing. All right. So with that said, let's look at Patrick Henry. So these are 5 questions related to the Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. That's pretty much Patrick Henry's only famous speech, I think. He had a few others. He was always complaining about the 2-3 raise. Are the Rays going to be able to pull it off? 5 questions related to the function of the Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. If you are in my class, you have not taken this yet if you're watching this on Monday, the day I post this video. So go ahead and take it before you watch me describe the answers, because this is all formative. This is meant to see how well you do. I borrowed a few questions from those that my students submitted. I'd asked them to write 5 questions. I asked them to steal the wording from my prior quizzes, and very few did that. A lot of them just went off the grid and made their own questions, and they weren't that good and they weren't useful. And I felt very frustrated with even giving the activity in the first place. There's a couple questions that I borrowed from students' homework that were actually well written. For example, so if you haven't taken this, pause it and give yourself a minute to do it, because now I'm going to go over the answers. The first question, the function of the first paragraph, where he says, no man thinks more highly than I do of patriotism and worldly abilities, worthy gentlemen, et cetera, et cetera. Is it to unify the audience with divine ideals, reveal the motivation and reading of the speech, reason for his ambivalent stance, establish patriotism of the audience, introduce the argument? This one was written by a student. I might have modified that one a little bit to make it more clearly wrong, but reveal the motivation and reasoning of the speech was the correct answer. And I thought that was a pretty solidly written question with some good distractors. Establish the patriotism of the audience? No, not really. That's not the It's like the real purpose of that first paragraph is to start for Patrick Henry to explain why he's motivated to speak here. It's because he can't contain himself. He's got to talk about this. No man thinks more highly than he does about the truth, as he puts it. So that was the first question. Which of the following best characterizes the relationship between the second and the third paragraph? Now, here's something that makes these questions so annoying. And I can't, they didn't offer AP Lang when I was in high school, but I can imagine being a student and hating these type of questions, because look at how much you have to read in order to start to figure out what the correct answer is. The second paragraph states the disadvantages of engaging in a war. So the third paragraph discusses an alternative method of resolving such disagreements. You have to that's why having a clear understanding of what the paragraphs are about will make this process easier for you before you even get to it. The correct answer, and this is one that I created because I wanted to have an example of that, is the second one. The second paragraph establishes the speaker's view, and the third paragraph provides evidence for why the speaker feels that way. And so it establishes that second paragraph. He's talking about how he's got to say this. He's got to speak out, because to not do so would be treason. And the third paragraph provides lots of evidence for why he feels this need to speak out. All the crimes that the British have been committing against the colonists. Okay, so, and I actually borrowed a lot of these distractor questions from a released test. So I modified a few of these, but the third provides counters to the claim. No, it doesn't. It's supporting the claim. The third paragraph explains how they should fight. No, not really. It's more explaining why they should fight. Third paragraph discusses an alternative method of resolving. Yeah, no. Second, this first one you should know immediately. Oh, well, this isn't correct, because he's very much warmongering. He's trying to get people to go to war. All right, so we've established why that one was the correct answer. Why the second choice was the right answer. Okay, so at the beginning of the fourth paragraph, the author asked, will it be when we are totally disarmed, when the British Guards shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by resolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusion phantom of hope until our enemies shall have us bound, us hand and foot, primarily to... So, he is doing this to counter an argument introduced earlier in the paragraph. So the argument is we should fight another time. Okay? And this is a question I made, and I'm trying to get you clued into, do you see how that one's a much more rhetorical and effective answer than depicting how horrible the British soldiers are? Like, he's doing that to counter an argument, not to just, he's already explained how horrible the British are in his third paragraph. And it's not to establish his credibility. It's not to explain his line of reasoning. And it's not to establish how the British Army will strike. Okay? So that's why that's the best answer. And sometimes there are indeed answers that could be like, well, that's kind of correct, but this is the one that is the most correct. And the wording they always use is select the best answer. They don't say select the right answer or the only correct answer. They always use that kind of squirrely wording to absolve themselves if there's an issue. Okay. The next one, I made this one. The speaker says, besides, sir, we have no election in paragraph 4, primarily to, is it to acknowledge an alternative perspective, invoke the authority of a widely held opinion, criticize the British form of government that prevents voting, highlight the inevitability of the situation, illustrate how nations might discourage from violating treaties. Well, we got to get rid of that one. That one's completely nonsense. We can get rid of this one. Not an alternative perspective. He's not acknowledging it, at least. He's not invoking the authority. So is he criticizing the form of government that prevents voting? No, he's not. Let's double check. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to desire it, it is too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. He's such a... as if he is going to actually fight with any of the soldiers. Patrick Henry. What a little weasel. All right, so he's doing it to highlight the inevitability of the situation. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with criticizing their lack of an ability to vote when he says we have no election. So I imagine when students take this, that will be a very common, if people don't select this as the correct answer, that will be the one that they go for. And this, in my opinion, is the type of question that's just purely trying to assess, do you understand what's being said in the text? And part of understanding what's being said sometimes just means go back and look at it in the context of the paragraph. All right, in the third paragraph, if we wish to be free, we must fight, primarily serves as, this is a student-created question, but I liked it. Yeah, an emotional call to action, as opposed to a hyperbolic phrase, a subtle struggle, reminiscent patriotism, and amusing anecdote. Yeah, that's an okay question. Or, yeah, it's all right. I just don't, the only reason I'm being critical of it is I'm not sure I could see one that's that. No, that is good. Because these are all different strategies. Well, a subtle struggle isn't a type of choice you could make. An amusing anecdote. I'll change the wording on that question, or a subtle struggle. A nostalgic reminder is a better wording. All right, one thing I screwed up with this as well that I need to do is the questions appear in chronological order, meaning this is asking a question about the third paragraph, and that means it should appear in the middle of the questions. They never ask a question about the end of the passage at the beginning, or vice versa. When the first questions are going to ask about the beginning of the passage, and as you work your way through the questions, it'll follow in chronological order, more or less, the progression of the text, which is a nice thing to know. Did I note that? I'll note that here. Four. All right. Maybe I'll do additional recordings talking about my sinners in the hands of an angry God and Queen Elizabeth. You know what? I mean, I'm not sure what benefit I'm really giving you by going over these questions and the answers. I've done it with these two, and I will workshop this with my own classes and find out how useful this has even been for them. But really, the resource is these practice sets that give you answers, because it's tough to find good practice that resembles what you're going to see on test day. And I'm not saying mine is a one-to-one identical representation of it, but I'm trying my hardest, and I'm stealing as much of the wording as possible from old College Board tests to try to make it as similar as to what you're going to see. So I encourage you to do them. I encourage you to ask me questions should they arise about certain questions, and then try to use these strategies on the day of your summative for my class if you have me. And I'm going to ask you to answer 20 questions with 3 different passages, and you'll get, I think we're going to give you 25 minutes. No, I think 30 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 30 minutes to answer 20 questions. So plenty of time to do that. And yeah, I'm not going to give you anything about attitude and like having a positive attitude, because multiple choice is a grind, and some students really like it. And some students are good test takers just naturally. But I do think this is a skill that with practice and with an understanding of the questions you're being asked, you can show significant improvement from the beginning of the course to test day. So hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you next time.